So, good morning, friends. In the last couple of videos, we've been doing what best I could describe as church history in a way. We've been looking at the Unitarian influence in American history, and I've been pointing to trailheads. The way I teach, is like I say, you might want to watch this and you can read that. And then when we convene again, I talk as if maybe you've done a lot of that homework, maybe you haven't. If not, you can pick up on what others might have learned, such as Unitarianism had like an arc. And this is when you're telling a story in general, like Buffy the Vampire Slayer or whatever, the arc of Willow's character, the arc of Buffy's character, whatever. Same thing with churches. They have like an arc, the arc of Christianity, and they have interrelationships with other religions. It's a fascinating topic. Now, on the screen here, I don't know if you've been reading this. It's kind of an offbeat, I would say, counterculture narrative. I would say vintage, and I would say typical. Okay, your turn. So at the end, I invite you, the reader, to spin your own tale, and then I dive into some recent history around the Mueller report and such. Brunch of Giants, I call it. Very clearly, a literary tieback to the meme, the industry missed. So if you type that into, I'm using DuckDuckGo, give it a shot, and Google whatever, put quotes around it, keep those words together as a phrase. The industry missed. Where it takes me is directly into a PDF of Grunch of Giants. And I single this out, I make this important, not only because we're talking about liberating people from a mortgage, having a good secure base where you're not the one who's like, how do I live another day? That hand to mouth thing where you feel like you're at the short end of the stick and then people around you seemingly don't work at all. What's going on? Right? So Grunch of Giants, digging further into the critical path space that we've been talking about, pulls out what Fuller would consider to be solutions, and that puts him kind of in a utopian vein. You should link him at this point to Aldous Huxley. And we'll get to him later and his overlap with Alan Watts. We'll be looking at Alan Watts. But for right now, let me just jump to the Quakers for a second, because I've been narrating the arc of Unitarians, and I'm not a Unitarian. I'm not the best one to tell the story, nor is that true of Quakers necessarily, but I have given it some thought. So let's see, where do I have that on tap here? Let's just show you what you can do. Go to my worldgameblogspot.com, as I've been showing you. The right margin has all these assets and so forth. But I'm just typing Quakers. Let's hope there's Quakers and racism. Goes back a long way. Reminds me, something I want to talk about is the Pirate Party USA and the planks. I'll end up with that. I'll keep the video short. I'm going to do the arc of Quakers. We're talking about the industry that industry missed and the political leverage you have over the government, so-called. Why aren't the public schools teaching this history, especially the math part, even in literature? And then so long as they're not teaching it, they're trying to divert attention away from the industry missed. We got Boeing unemployed. We got a huge aerospace sector here. Why isn't it at least a discussion that maybe the driverless car wasn't everybody's first priority dream, nor even Hyperloop, believe it or not? There are other dreams out there. All right, so I talk about Puritanism as another theme, and because we're doing church history, as I said, where do Quakers come down? Are Quakers against beer? What are Quakers for and against? And again, I don't speak for all Quakers, and I tell you up front that Quakers, here's one, Chuck Fager, Quakers are all over the map and have schisms all over the place. So, of course, I'm just one storyteller here. And you can see by all that I'm fishing up, just by typing the word Quaker, that I must have a lot to say. But what I'm trying to find is the arc story. Let's type in arc. Let's just type in that word. Arc in this case means like a climax, a denouement, a build-up. Arc is kind of a literary term, and it has to do with the shape of a story in a way. Okay, and Quakers reached their arc around the time of the British Industrial Revolution, a heady time, and utopianism was in the air. There was Cadbury and some of his thoughts. Quaker utopianism, which is examined in this book, Quakernomics, is one of the key texts, I would say, for this curriculum in some ways, because it goes back to when utopianism was cool. It was okay to think about. You could simulate. You could have a video game, even if we never get there as humans in the flesh. It's fun to have a simulation where everything works. And why does it work and how does it work? Hey, it's right there. They live within their energy budget, even. So it's even sustainable. And sure, we don't have it, but isn't it fun to have science fiction that does? Okay, that didn't work either, and I figured out why, because I'm in the wrong I'm in the wrong blog, but you saw some interesting stuff there, hopefully. I know, scrolling too much, too fast. So control room, let's do Quaker again. I have basically 4 blogs, if you count Coffee Shops Network, which is a little bit stands apart from the other 3 Quakers and is devoted to a hypothetical, or you could say generic, aloof in the sense of every special case is just an implementation of this charitable giving coupled with like arcade gaming and like games of skill. But when you win in gambling, and this gambling, you give it to other causes. And if you're transparently just supporting yourself, right, you've got a profile. And people can sort of study your giving history. That's one of the things you're building as a current philanthropist, right? You want to be known for what it is you are delivering. So now I'm in control room. I've typed Quakers. I've searched. And I'm hoping, okay, here we go, the Quaker arc. So here we are. I'm duplicating what might be your experience of searching a blog, somewhat grab bag, but it's still a lot easier than rifling through boxes and boxes of files or whatever. I mean, the computer really has sped up the retrieval process. Here's a very fun little Fighting Quaker icon guy, Earlham College. Fighting Quaker, you know, it's funny, right, as an oxymoron in a way, because they're supposedly pacifists. So where I tell the story comes a lot from reading some Catholic analysis as well that described, okay, until 1756. Where did I get that date? So it's actually called Catholic analysis. And so there's a subtext here that talks about this little pamphlet and talks about why Friends became unpopular. Number one, their utopia did not include endless Indian wars. Like looking forward at the founding of this nation on a great new territory of North America, the Quakers were not in the mood to start some lasting war that would just go on and on and on with Native Americans. That was not in their picture of what they wanted to have happen. And these are just a bunch of like kind of oligarch, aristocrat, rich guy, gal, you know, successful, middle class, well-to-do urban burghers in Philadelphia, which is their land. And this is in the heyday of Philadelphia. Pennsylvania was like the land of the Penn family, right? William Penn, and there were Penn stations to this day everywhere. And so Quakers, you know, looking ahead, thought maybe they were going to be like the dominant ethic around here, and they weren't going to pay for any war against the Indians. In fact, they were quite sympathetic to the quote unquote Indians, John Woolman and so forth. So they fell out of power because the European mindset swarming over here in droves was not about to be stopped by a bunch of like stuck up holier than thou types. And then number two, they weren't on the right side for a long time on Quakerism. They were against having slaves and were pretty ruthless about disowning themselves. Like Quakers who did own slaves lost their membership. They couldn't claim to be Quaker, and the whole membership system and who has legit claim to be Quaker and all that. You know, it matters a lot when people are being disowned and stuff. It doesn't matter much when those games aren't life and death. So the Quakers were similar to the Unitarians in what they espouse, They're looking into more humane prisons, better mental hospitals. Not that those are all entirely different. And what else? Basically, inequality testimonies, countering those. And racist testimony would be, against Quaker testimony because it's all about creating these class distinctions, really. Now, if racism doesn't have anything to do with class, well, maybe it's okay, right? You just everybody admires everybody's race, and it doesn't mean anything as to how you're treated or what your social economic status is. It's just completely decoupled. That's what they call being colorblind, I guess. But I'm not really going that route in my thinking here. Let me see, the fastest way to get there. I promised I'd end on my Pirate Party planks. And this is what I'm doing. I'm thinking ahead as to what those are. And okay, here we go. Pirate Party planks. So here they are. So far, I'm keeping them brief. I can think of more. Right now on the fly, I would say Pirate Party is really into the industry mist. Aerospace yurts, please. Less howling about how horrible the economy has to be. Copyleft greater than copyright. That's just telling the truth about the revolution that did occur in the realm of intellectual property. Just a modicum of truth about that. I have a good police story about that, about how we were trying to criminalize these youth until the police figured out that there was a legal way for them to do all the things they wanted to do. And that sort of turned tables on the schools. What if police took over the function of being the schools? Right? Because they see how certain kids are being lied to, including what's going on with this concentric hierarchy, not in your math books for 40 years. Gosh, talk about malpractice. But you've made your decision, right? But as the Pirate Party, we're not forced to respect your decision, right? To some extent, we can be critical. Now, Tulsi's reprimand of Trump is greater than impeachment verbiage. See, she had a more strident and self-published statement about why this guy should be disbarred. And it went way out beyond what the Democrats were willing to talk about, the rest of the Democrats, because she was a Democrat. Because why? Because they wanted to narrow it down to just a misbehavior by this one guy. And the more general the principles on which you're impeaching, the more you're going to find everybody is involved in those same crimes, right? And so I think that was more fun. That was a better way to go, the way she went. And the way we're telling the story here, just to wrap it up, is the Smedley-Butler exposed plot, the so-called business plot during FDR's time to basically have the private sector take over behind the scenes and just stage a government, which Smedley was going to be like their chosen front man. And he instead turned to Congress and said, look at this. This is treason. And Congress kind of shuffles its feet and looks away because it's up to its ears in this whole thing. Because really, democracy was pretty fragile even then. And what I'm saying, by the time we get to Reagan, it's pretty obvious what's gone on. And that's where, in our lore, in Grunch of Giants, we already acknowledge the bankruptcy because of rich people getting so much richer. I mean, the whole promise of the American dream has been shattered. And really, it's the end of the United States right there. It's the withering of the state. And you wouldn't really care, except that it's a leading futurist who writes it, and he gets a Medal of Freedom from Reagan after he writes it. In a way, there's and then no one picks that up. It's out of your schools that this all happened. More evidence, as you see, that we have no real government at the moment that has kind of legitimacy, right? Because of the curriculum that were forced down our throats here. So that's where we get more rhetorical. That's where we talk about the Medal of Freedom winner and the famous quotes and all that kind of stuff.